everybody, and welcome to episode 11 of Cookie Pocket, an attempt at a podcast. Today we're going to be talking about I Don't Feel at Home in This World Anymore, a 2017 revenge dramedy, let's call it that, starring Melanie Lynskey as Ruth, who has her house broken into and her grandmother's silver stolen. Wanting to get back at the criminals, she goes to her neighbor, Tony, played by Elijah Wood, and decides to hunt the people down who broke into her house and stole her grandmother's silverware. And it's quite a ride. So, Christian, Mitchell, what'd you think of the film?
Well, I liked it. I liked it a lot. It was, at the same time, it's kind of like, I guess I'll call it like a Last Jedi type of deal where I really, really loved parts of it, and I was really, really, really bothered by other parts of it. Oh. So like kind of two extremes in the same product. But I gave it a 3 out of 5. While I was watching it, it was probably, of the 4 picks that you've given us so far, the one that I enjoyed the most. And aside from like being a little distracted by Elijah Wood not being Frodo, and obviously that's not his fault. Like he's a working actor and he's good. He's a good actor. He's good in his part. But like I just can't help but see that. Yeah. Like and the same goes for like prominent superhero actors and plenty of other examples. But yeah, I thought our lead actress, I don't remember her name, but I thought she was great.
Melanie Lynskey, yeah. Okay,
yeah. And the like Tarantino-esque unraveling towards the end was something. And I was definitely like glued to the screen at that point, so I guess that worked. Yeah, we'll get into more particulars later, but overall I gave it a 3 out of 5 and I enjoyed it.
Okay. Mitchell?
This movie is crack, which I'm really happy to say. Basically, because, you know, there's some movies that are just like, you clearly made to be stimulating, and this is exactly that. And it chooses 2, 3, maybe 4 genres to peel from, and I think it does a really good job blending those together. And it's funny, not like it's trying to be a comedy, it's just the situations themselves are funny.
Yeah.
And it's funny and also disgusting at the same time, but in a very amusing and riveting way, I guess.
Yeah.
And that is its biggest strong suit, I think. And it holds up throughout the entire movie, and the conclusion is definitely, you know, ups the ante on all accounts. But I gave it a 3 out of 5. I thought I really enjoyed it, and there wasn't really anything particularly like groundbreaking. But it was, you know, it was fun, and seeing Elijah Wood like this is definitely amusing. But yeah, no, the casting's pretty good. I think Ruth and Tony really played off of each other really well. And, you know, it was a fun, entertaining, I called it a train wreck, a pretty train wreck on Twitter. That's a compliment.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was pretty good.
Yeah. I also gave this a 3 out of 5. I think it's the first film that we've all agreed on, all around. This is the directorial debut of Macon Blair, who in this film actually has a cameo as the guy in the bar who spoils the book that she's reading.
Yeah.
And he's primarily known as an actor. He was in movies like Blue Ruin and Green Room, which are kind of well-known sort of indie revenge films. And I think you can tell this is a directorial debut. While it is kind of a story that takes on several different genres and a kind of complicated tone, story-wise, it doesn't feel all that complicated. And the shot structure isn't that complicated. It feels like maybe Blair was sort of taking it easy on the structure of the film. He didn't want to stretch himself too much on his debut. But I still think this is really entertaining. Like Mitchell said, there are some really funny moments, but they don't come from the movie necessarily trying to be an out-and-out comedy. They come from the characters just sort of being funny in the situations that they're put in and the way that they work off of each other. And I think that really works. This isn't a film that I love necessarily, but I do really enjoy this film, and I'm interested to see what Macon Blair does next. Now, Christian, you said there were some specific points in the movie that really turned you off. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Sure. I kind of have to jump all the way to the end for this one, but The big chase between Ruth and the dude.
Marshall.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Marshall. And she's like hiding behind the tree trunk and talking to him, and he like kind of knows where she is, but doesn't really know where she is, even though it would probably be pretty obvious where she is. And then he figures it out, and then she throws like two rocks that fit in her palm at him, and somehow those are like strong enough to knock him backwards into the pond. And then the snake like bites his face. Like they from the inciting incident at the house up until that point, I was like super into it and down with every twist and thought it was executed well. But when she like turns around and throws the rocks at him, I'm like, okay, that's just kind of stupid. Like I didn't really, I they looked like small stones, and this guy's like, oh my gosh, I just got like force pushed into this pond, and I don't know. And then I was also frustrated because I felt like they were kind of, even though Marshall is kind of like a side character at first, after his two accomplices are dead, it really feels like they're kind of building an arc for this character, and like everyone has an ending, but his ending is the snake is still attached to his face and he's screaming madly and running through the forest, and we don't really know what happens to him.
Yeah.
But
sequel.
Yeah, why not? No.
I will admit it is a little irritating not to get a resolution with Marshall. I think there might be some kind of a suggestion that maybe he was captured, because at the end the wife of Chris is looking through like police photographs and like saying, oh, this person was here, but we never like see what happens to him. And I agree that's kind of annoying. Mitchell, what did you think of that moment, or those moments, I would say?
I'm not sure. I kind of felt like all the scenes leading up to that were sufficient for me, I guess, to be satisfied with how the movie ended. I did feel dissatisfied at that particular moment, but I just think things went so off the rails at that point, to keep with my train metaphor. Things went so off the rails by that point, I was kind of not really worried about how the story was going to conclude, and I don't think they were really worried about how it actually was going to end very much either. Like you said, Zach, it was, he's trying to keep a simple story, so I don't think it was super necessary to be like, we make sure we have all the knots tied and everything.
All right. Well, that actually makes a pretty good transition into my next point. What did you guys think of the villains in this film? Not just Marshall, but Chrissy and the woman that's with them. What did you kind of think of them as a trio? Did you find them threatening? Did you find them funny? What were your thoughts?
I thought they were genuinely terrifying, especially Chrissy. Like the opening bit we get with him looking in the mirror. Like, I interpreted that to mean that he's basically a psychopath. And when he's at the party and he's confronted by the dude outside, and he's really good at manipulating his facial expression and telling stories convincingly, and so I was definitely frightened by the idea of this character just like being able to influence the way that he interacts with anyone in such an easy manner. There are also funny moments for sure, like the banter between them. But I mean, after Chrissy dies and after Ruth gets captured by the remaining two, I feel like any humor kind of gets sucked out, and it's like totally replaced by like a horrific approach, to me at least. So
okay, Mitchell, what did you think?
Yeah, they kind of reminded me of the Manson family from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah,
it kind of gave me that vibe, especially when they're in the van and everything, and they're all like stupid, and they can't figure each other out because they're all like psychologically messed up. So I thought that was interesting. It was I don't think there was too much focus necessarily on them, but I think the whole crime and figuring out the crime and going after them and vengeance is kind of the main focus. So I think they were developed enough for us to be, frightened by them, but also get doses of comedy towards the end.
Okay, I feel like I had like a totally different interpretation of them as villains to you guys. I personally didn't find them all that scary. I think, at least to me, it felt like you're sort of meant to find them kind of pathetic. Because even though Chrissy kind of comes off as scary in that original altercation, when he actually like tries to be scary like to Ruth and tries to approach her, he gets hit in the throat with a bad plastic mold of a shoe, and then he just stumbles in front of a bus and dies. Like, that's not really like a big villain death. It's like a, oh, I didn't plan this well type thing. And when and you mentioned Marshall kind of falling down the hill backwards in that scene. While I do agree those rocks are kind of small, I think the way he dies, or doesn't die, but the way he's defeated is kind of meant to contribute to that feel of him being sort of pathetic. Because the way she riles him up into like finally charging up the hill to get her is she insults his tattoos, which I feel wouldn't be a thing that would necessarily get like a hardcore villain pumped up and ready to kill, and then she just has to throw these 2 small stones at him and he's thrown off balance and topples backwards down the hill. I think this kind of falls into sort of my idea of all the characters, but I think the villains in the movie are sort of deliberately meant to be not very good at what they're trying to do. When they break into the house, even though they got guns and they're willing to hurt people and they aren't good people at all, Chris points out that they planned this really, really badly. Like they tell him to go and get the stuff out of the safe, and the money they're looking for isn't even there, and then they're just sort of stuck with, well, now what do we do? The gun that they get to like help take part in the hold up explodes in the woman's hand and blows her hand off. So I think while there are some threatening scenes, I think a lot of the scenes are kind of meant to subtract from that threat and sort of reveal that while these are villains, they're also like real people that make mistakes and do dumb stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's interesting how sort of the different aspects of them resonated with all of us differently. But speaking of the characters in general, what did you guys think of Ruth and Tony, and additionally Melanie Lynskey and Elijah Wood, the actors who play them? What did you think of them and their back and forth?
Well, I mean, I think they worked together great. They definitely had good chemistry. My opinion on Ruth like changed a billion times while I was watching, because at first I was like totally sympathizing with her, and I thought like the opening sequences where she's just having a bad day were well directed, and it captures like the monotonous feeling without like actually boring the viewer, and you feel sympathetic for her, but also at the end of the day I kind of was annoyed with Ruth to some extent because of like the one exchange he has with the police officer like at the precinct, where he's basically like, compared to other people, you have a pretty good life. and I know that's like a really awful thing to say to someone who's like going through something, but I there is definitely a little bit of that with Ruth, and I mean, yeah, it's not really a fair judgment, but I mean, overall I liked her character, and Elijah Wood was great, even though I saw Hobbit the entire time. He was funny. I liked his facial hair. I liked his rat tail.
Yeah, I really liked how they played off of each other. I think one of the main interesting things that this film does well, that a lot of films that try to do this same thing with outcast characters tend to do, is that they kind of make them a little bit too important. They kind of make them too significant, as if because they're out there, they're more important than the average person, or they have like some type of coming of age moment or something like that, and they over exaggerate it. In this, it's literally just 2 outcasts that are going through these terrible situations in their best way possible, and they just happen to be funny and happen to have good lines throughout the whole film. And I think Elijah Wood kind of plays he's a lot less deadpan, I guess, as opposed to Melanie Lynskey. But Melanie Lynskey kind of is more deadpan, and then Elijah Wood kind of says stuff that's more about timing, like saying things funny in weird moments. And this, if you can pick apart their characters just because they're playing them in a very organic way. And it's not, you don't really feel like they're written in some unnatural world. This is a very, very natural feeling film. Like, these are definitely people that could exist. And if you throw them in these weird situations, then something weird will come out of it, such as regular show.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that these feel like real people. I think a shortcut, maybe a lesser screenwriter or director would make with this film would be to make Elijah Wood's character Tony like a legitimate like ninja badass. But in reality, like our villains, he's just a wee bit pathetic. Like there's a wee edge of like, I mean, this guy's kind of a wimp in there, like, because even though he, like, really admires this sort of samurai and ninja imagery, and he likes to think of himself as really tough and a spy, he really isn't. Like, the first time that they knock somebody else out, he holds his mace out, and the guy grabs it and pulls on it and basically knocks himself out. One of my favorite scenes in this film is Elijah Wood's character says, okay, well, we got the license plate. We can find him. I'm gonna hack. And then all he does is just like Google search ways to look up a car based on the license plate, which feels so real to me. There's all kinds of people who will say like, oh, I hacked it. Oh, I know what I'm doing. And then they just look things up online or they guess somebody's password, which isn't legitimate hacking at all. Mm-hmm. I definitely agree with Mitchell that Melanie Lynskey is sort of they're both quirky characters, but Melanie Lynskey, if this were a comedic duo, is kind of the straight woman, and then Elijah Wood is kind of the funnier, not bouncing off the walls character, but he's a bit more outlandish, he's a bit more eccentric, he's where a lot of the humor comes from. But I think they work really well together, and I think Elijah Wood, at least to me, really vanishes into this role. It's been a while since I watched Lord of the Rings films and saw him in those, but I did enjoy them a lot. I used to watch them a lot when I was younger. And as somebody who has those stories and those characters firmly ingrained in his head, Frodo never came to me when watching this. But I guess that's different for different viewers.
Yeah, and I mean,
Frodo didn't come up to me either.
Yeah, I have to confess, I didn't really know Elijah Wood was still like out there. Well, I knew he was like alive.
Yeah.
I didn't really know how much work he was getting. I basically have only ever seen him in Lord of the Rings, this, and he did a voice acting role in the weakest animated Star Wars TV show, and that's like all I know about his career. So I mean, it's definitely like not fair of me to say something like that. But if I saw like Adam Driver and Daisy Ridley in another live action movie, I would be distracted, even if they were really good at acting. Like it's just it's totally not the actor's fault. But as a viewer, I found it a little distracting.
Yeah. I mean, not Adam Driver. Elijah Wood is absolutely still around. He's just not in kind of these bigger productions necessarily. He's done a lot of indie stuff. So if you, listener, have also not heard from Mr. Elijah Wood in a while, look him up on IMDb. He's been doing some interesting stuff. Now, a couple moments in this film, I would say, get not very religious, but involve some religious themes and moments, and the character of Tony is established to be quite religious himself, and takes Ruth to church in a couple of scenes. What were your interpretations of those scenes and those potentially Christian themes? Do you think they're overtly kind of praising or pressing Christianity, or do you think maybe it's about something a little deeper than that?
I don't think any of it was like really overt either way. I just think it was sort of used as a means of communicating how like different modes of spiritual belief can like sincerely affect your life and your manner of thinking and just the way you process events around you. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really, really important to the way that they resolve Ruth's arc. And one of my issues immediately after watching the movie was I didn't think they resolved Ruth that much at all. Because after all this crazy stuff happens to her, she goes back to her daily life of like monotony and frustration with people around her. And pardon my French to the listeners, but it's important to hear this phrase. People are still assholes in her life after everything. And that's kind of like, to me, that's like the central theme of this movie. She just wants people to stop being assholes.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, they still are. And she's, for the most part, still herself. Maybe she's a little less timid, but I don't think that's communicated strongly as a big change. And the only thing that was a big change in her routine, is we see her go back to the church again after Tony, I guess, is presumed dead. But that's a whole nother confusing thing that we might touch on later. But I was fine with the way they included religion, because it was I don't think it was overt or overdone. It was pretty subtle, and it didn't really like take a definite side morally one way or the other. I just think it was a nice exploration to how those concepts and those ideas can mean a lot to a character or a person.
Okay. Maybe I should bring this up as a sub question, because we're kind of getting into this territory. How do you guys interpret the title to this film? How do you think the title applies to this movie? Mitchell, I offer you both the religion question and this question, because I think the answers are probably going to intertwine a bit. But
all right, I can handle this.
Okay.
Apparently, it comes from a hymn. I already looked this up, so
Yeah.
I got you. This world is not my home. I'm just a passing through. My treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. And it's supposed to be a Matthew 6 reference. Store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. So it's kind of interesting having a spirituality in the background as kind of like something that just simmers, and it invites you if you are interested in it. And you don't really have to think about it if you don't want to. So I think that's the best possible way to introduce religion in a movie not about religion necessarily. But it's definitely about spirituality, because feeling at home is kind of just like fitting and finding your place in the world. And, and Ruth figures out at the end that you can't change the world necessarily. You can't change the fact that people are assholes, or that, that the world's acting like it hates you. But you yourself can be positive and improve yourself as an individual and give love to others, and do I don't know what the golden rule is. It's like do I don't know what it is. Be honest or something. You know what I mean. Be righteous.
Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. There.
Thank you, literary expert. Okay. I can't. Okay, you know what? I can't. I'm bad. Okay. Yes. So she's living a life of solitude, and she doesn't know. You don't necessarily have to rely on other people or rely on the world to give back to you. Mm-hmm. But as long as you act as a morally righteous person, and you do good to others, and you will theoretically feel love back. You'll feel sincerity back. So. Love thy neighbor and things like that. You live life more isolated, I guess. Isolated in the sense that you are more focused on your inner circles than you are with the world as a whole, or blaming everyone else for your problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When I first saw this film, which was a couple months ago, I didn't think about the title at all. It just, they used that song by Woody Guthrie, which is a version of that hymn towards the end, and I thought, oh, the title, look at that. But giving it some thought, I think you brought up kind of that sense of being at home as being central to the plot, Mitchell. I don't necessarily think when they're referring to I don't feel at home in this world anymore, they're talking about the idea of belonging. I think the concept of not feeling home here more applies to not just not enjoying your time in this world anymore, not feeling comfortable in this world anymore. I think to a certain extent, I think it can almost be applied to sort of the process of growing up. When you're younger, you're kind of comfortable, and you assume that the world is nice, and you're kind of free from that knowledge that, as Ruth says in the film, people are assholes. And then as you get older, you kind of start to recognize that. And I feel like at the beginning of that movie, that idea that life and the world are just kind of generally crummy is kind of rammed home by the fact that on TV we've got footage of like riots and rallies taking place. There are people in the 15 items or less line at the grocery store who have way more than 15 items, and she got to stand behind them. There's that whole thing in the parking lot of the grocery store where there's a car backing out and she's trying to walk past, and they're just in a stalemate for a long time because nobody wants to go first. And then additionally, the police aren't really doing much about the case of her house being broken into, and dogs keep pooping on her lawn. So there's all these little things that make life uncomfortable and make you feel not at home in life anymore. And I think the point of kind of those religious sequences is the world is always going to be kind of generally crappy, and things are always generally going to kind of suck to some extent. But it's about finding things in life that make you feel at home, and that's what's going to get you through. So I feel, Christian, you mentioned that you didn't really think Ruth had undergone any kind of arc. I feel like the arc at the end of this is the world still sucks. People are still kind of assholes. We keep using that quote. Sorry, Mom. But she's found religion, and it's suggested, I think, at the end that she started a relationship with Elijah Wood's character. Because, Christian, you seem to be a little unsure on whether or not he was alive or dead.
Yeah.
There's a scene at the end where they're at a barbecue with her sister, and she turns around and he's like there, surrounded by heavenly light. But then we pull out to see that he's actually just cooking burgers, and there's a porch light behind him. So I think that's meant to be like one final joke, and the implication is that Ruth has found religion. She started some kind of a relationship with Tony, or she's at least friends with Tony, and those are the things that get her through, despite the fact that the world isn't necessarily as homey as it might be.
Well,
But Christian, did you have any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I do think the religion thing kind of gives Ruth a little bit of development. I didn't mean to say that she had no arc whatsoever. I was totally confused by Tony showing up in the final scene. I had no idea. I thought it was like some like goofy like force ghost type thing, and I totally did not understand it. And I still don't understand it after you've explained it to me, because she, mostly because of the routine we see beforehand, she does everything alone. She goes to church alone, which to me is like the most notable thing that she would probably not do without him if he were the one that had introduced her to doing that and brought that routine into her life. It strikes me as odd that she would do it on her own if they were dating or still friends. And I guess like the one thing that really made me question and or realize that Tony was still alive is when he's talking to the other guy that's like married to her friend
about how to cook burgers correctly.
But, it was funny, but it was also frustrating. Like, what does this mean? And I don't think. And Zach, you're a very smart guy. I would wager that you are smarter than me, and I do not think that the average viewer can understand what they were going for in that last scene. I found it a little frustrating.
I wasn't trying to understand it. I was just taking it for what it was, and that's it. I'm not really going to think about it too much. I don't really care if he's alive or not, to be honest. I'm just glad I got to see Elijah Wood again, and that's it, okay?
Fair enough.
I understand there's a story, and there's a structure, and there's actual character arcs, and there's development, and underlying themes, and things like that. But I think the themes and how the two characters play off of each other throughout the whole film, and what you take from like the title and the obvious message from the title, that's all of that I think is what's important. I think taking the film and the actual plot itself and trying to figure out why things are like why is Tony alive, or why doesn't really matter. that's what I'm gonna ask. That at least that's my opinion.
Okay. So I know that you don't necessarily care whether he's alive or dead, but when you watched it, did you think, oh, he's alive, or did you think, no, he's dead? So which did your mind automatically jump to, Mitchell?
I right when I saw him in the fog, I definitely thought Forrest Ghost. That was literally that was the first thing. That was an obvious reference. But then when he's on the crutch and he's cooking the burgers and stuff, I'm like, oh, okay, I guess he survived somehow. I'm not really gonna think about how he survived, because with all those stab wounds and bleeding out for that long, I don't think he would have survived. But I'm not going to think about it too much. That was my thought process.
Okay. I mean, even when I first saw the film, I always interpreted that as I actually don't remember a shot in that ending montage where she goes to church alone. I know there's one way earlier in the film when they kind of have their falling out where she goes to church alone. But if there is a shot in the final montage, I would presume that's just to establish that, well, it's to kind of bait you into thinking, oh, maybe he's dead. But in reality, he would just be, like, in hospital because he just got out of a very bad stabbing incident. And then when I first watched it and she turned around and there's that extremely tight shot of his face and he's backlit and he smiles, and I thought, oh, that's sweet. He's smiling at her from heaven, and they pull out and he's having an argument about how to cook burgers correctly with her brother-in-law. I mean, I immediately jumped to, oh, great, he's alive.
Yeah.
So I thought that was meant to be kind of the final bait and switch for the joke. So I'm interested that didn't automatically come across to you guys. But
I could be mixing up the two montages, like you said. That moment with her alone in church could very well be a different part of the movie. But even outside of that, there's like at the end of this big chase with Marshall, she like goes back to Tony and he's not responding and he looks limp and he looks dead. And it is very safe to assume he would be dead after being stabbed several times. And I don't know. I guess it's like a cute twist, but personally I found it annoying and not critically justifiable.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I personally am fine with it. I feel like that's all lead up to just that final cute twist, as you put it. I feel like I personally justify it as being part of Ruth's arc, but it's interesting you were so irritated by it. I haven't met anybody who disliked the ending that much. But
I would also say I don't think Ruth's arc should be dependent on Tony or Tony surviving. Like, Tony was definitely a good friend to her and was part of her growth, but I like the idea of her establishing a new status quo for herself that's independent of Tony and that shows her as more self-sufficient than she was at the beginning of the movie.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily... We're turning this into a bit of a tennis match, but I wouldn't necessarily say that her resolution is, like, dependent on Tony, but I think Tony is part of it. I mean, I think that ending conversation that she and her sister have implies that things still suck, but she's a little bit more comfortable, even without Tony there. But I think that kind of her making friends and being comfortable around people and not just going over to her sisters to cry when reading at her niece is kind of a big part of it. I feel like there needed to be somebody that she connected to by the end, because I think kind of her isolation is sort of a big part of the first part of it, and you kind of need that contrast by the end.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think Tony brought all of the tools for her to figure herself out and, gain a little bit of self-esteem. But, I think I would agree with Zach. I would say I think that he's definitely part of it. I don't think that he's entirely or she's the way that she is because of him. But, I don't know. I felt like she was relatively independent. I kind of felt like most of the film, a lot of what was being accomplished was because of Ruth.
Oh yeah.
And if anything, I think Tony kind of just served as a sidekick pretty much, but also a sidekick and also kind of a subtle spiritual advisor in his own right, not like a forced one where he's like, I'm going to tell you to read the New Testament now, but like, here's this lightsaber, figure this out. But no, I think she takes from everything what she needs. And it's like I said, it's a very natural thing. It's not, there's very little archetypal kind of air to this, I don't think.
Yeah. I would say the vibe that Ruth and Tony's relationship gives off is kind of like if George Bailey and Clarence teamed up to go and solve a crime, because you've got the one character that's kind of like down in the dumps and is like, oh, life is just awful, and then you've got our other character who's a bit more chipper and eager, and is kind of having fun with it. There are great scenes where Ruth is trying to take things really seriously, and then Tony's kind of eager to just be doing this at all and like having an adventure. When they go to Chrissy's house and they open the door and Ruth flashes the badge and she starts talking to the woman pretending she's a cop, and then Tony just interrupts and goes, police! Like, it's just like, it's a fantasy for him. He wants to be like action man, policeman. I mentioned before our conversation that to me, his character kind of feels like a weird amalgamation of all three of us and Dwight Schrute. Because he has he does have that sort of Dwight Schrute-ish misplaced confidence in himself. That is sort of charming in its own way, even though he is kind of inept to a certain extent. But yeah, that pretty much brings us to the end of my discussion notes. But before we go into the rundown, do we have any final thoughts on the movie?
I guess 3 out of 5.
Yeah, I do.
Woo! Yeah, do it, Mitchell. Do the thing.
3 out of 5. And I do have to mention something. I have a bias against Netflix movies. I'll say that. Mainly, and it had no influence on my rating or my critical analysis at all this time around. But I've seen I Am Not Okay With This, which is kind of like a short series, and then End of the Effing World.
Mm-hmm.
And both of those have a very, very similar nostalgic aesthetic and very similar kind of callback soundtrack.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a very overused aesthetic. And in this, it comes off a lot more natural. I appreciate the way that they did it here, kind of the 90s vibe, and the 79 Pontiac Firebird I really liked.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't know. I just don't like that. I don't like that overuse of that aesthetic. I feel like it's not very original, and I think it's very, repeated kind of. It's kind of like applying contemporary ideas to an older generation where all they wanted to take from the generation was the aesthetic, and that's it. Like, they just wanted to make diners look the way that they do and have certain cars and certain songs play and cassette tapes like they have in 13 Reasons Why that I watched the first 2 seasons of, unfortunately. But, yeah, I think that's an overused aesthetic. But I will say in this is not played nearly as much, and I really appreciated that, and I completely forgot about it halfway into the movie. But yeah, no, I really liked it, and the acting was very good, and it was a very interesting off-the-rails experience that, especially for today's times, I think anybody who likes Netflix movies for their aesthetic, this would be a good one. It's a good movie, like, I don't know, it's something that everybody can learn from, so in that case, I would say it's definitely 3 out of 5, and, if you liked Kill Bill, very Kill Bill, Quentin Tarantino, like Christian had said. But yeah, I really liked it, and I recommend it for most people.
Yeah. I would say it does have kind of those Tarantino vibes, although it's a lot less stylized. The director, actually, Macon Blair, has said that he thought of it as a follow-up to Joel Schumacher's movie Falling Down, which not many people have seen nowadays. Most people just know Schumacher for the Batman movies he made, but Falling Down is a pretty good movie about like an everyday businessman who kind of loses it and goes on a rampage through the city. And it does have kind of some thematic similarities to Tarantino and to this. But yeah, I should mention, this isn't a movie that was produced by Netflix. This movie was made independently in like 2016 and then chosen to be distributed by Netflix, but it does kind of have, especially in its advertising that Netflix prepared, it does have that aesthetic of some of its other shows and programs. I would say, although there are darker elements in this, I personally enjoy this as a lighthearted kind of dramedy with some revenge elements. And I would say this is a pretty good movie for like Saturday, Sunday afternoon viewing. There are, like I said, and like Christian said, some darker moments in there, but I think overall it's pretty fun, and I think that the acting really carries it through along with the little moments of humor. So 3 out of 5 for me.
Yeah. I'll just real quick say that like all 3 of us giving it a 3 out of 5 is, I think, in some ways better than if 2 of us rated it highly and 1 of us really hated it. Like I think it's a real testament that it could juggle a lot of different thematic approaches well, and all of us giving it a good rating means that it's probably open to a more broad audience than I certainly expected going into it. So I'll give it that strength.
Okay. I guess we'll hand it over to you then, Christian, for the rundown.
60 seconds. We say things about the movie we just talked about to Zach, and Zach responds with numbers out of 5. I'm going to set the timer for 60 seconds. Mitchell will start us off. Mitchell, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. 3, 2, 1, go.
The Elsewhere Saga.
3 out of 5.
Kevin the dog.
3 out of 5.
Paying closer attention to home security.
2 out of 5.
Having such beautiful little black eyes.
3 out of 5.
Dog poop not allowed signs.
4 out of 5.
Taped sneakers.
4 out of 5.
Unreliable authorities again.
3 out of 5.
Elijah Wood as Tony.
4 out of 5.
Pirate firearms.
3 out of 5.
Ninja sticks.
4 out of 5.
Cappuccino foam.
3 out of 5.
Being tired of people being assholes.
4 out of 5.
Remembering to enable Find My MacBook.
4 out of 5.
Throwing rocks.
2 out of 5.
Bringing one's mother into it.
3 out of 5.
Unexplained Force Ghost ripoffs.
2 out of 5.
Keyboard demo modes.
4 out of 5.
Stealing a lawn tiger.
3 out of 5.
Holy cow, we have 7 seconds to spare, and that was the entire list.
Oh my giddy
Wow.
aunt.
Oh.
I guess
I
we
don't
just
know
have
if
to
that's our
sit
fault
here
for
in
not
silence
preparing
for the
enough.
remaining seconds then.
Yeah. Well,
Okay then.
Yeah.
As we wrap up this episode of Cookie Pocket and Attempt at a Podcast, Mitchell, why don't you tell us what we're going to be talking about next time?
We're going to be talking about Heart's War, and we're going to watch it together. It's a kind of a courtroom drama. Of course, it's World War II again. So this is what you get for the final countdown. I hate you. This is very a lot more serious. Okay, this is probably the most serious film, and it also kind of it's very controversial. I guess in today's times it would be very controversial, but we're going to talk about it very critically, and I'm going to recommend it, and you're going to give it a high rating, or I'm going to come over to your house and I don't know, throw rocks at you or hit you with ninja chucks.
Well, okay. So
Well, it's Bruce Willis in it.
Yes, it does have Bruce Willis in it, and I'm told he cares on this one. So, tune in next time if you want to hear us satisfy Mitchell's niche with Heart's War. Until then, this has been us at Cookie Pocket and Attempt at a Podcast.